There is something culturally in the corporate world that is still toxic around this idea that somehow being the one that sleeps the least is the most heroic person in the office. What would you say could be most helpful to change our mindset and our viewpoint around making those behavioral changes?
If you want to be elite, there's certain things you just have to do. And if you're the person that's like, I do great on 5 hours of sleep, I can almost guarantee you don't have the genetic polymorphism that it's going to allow you to thrive on 5 hours of sleep. It's like a fraction of 1%. There are going to be seasons in life. Maybe you're an auditor, or maybe you're working taxes or whatever, like you're an accountant. Like there's certain like tax season, but most of your life should not be chaos. If it is, then you need to reevaluate things because you may not live a very long life. So unless you're a soldier or you're being deployed into a war zone, like, the corporate world, like it doesn't have to be like that. I would say if more than 10% of your days are like, I've got to pull an all-nighter, unless you're working in a medical profession where you have to work all night at a hospital, like I would reevaluate the situation. So one bad night of sleep, no big deal. You got a deadline that comes and you got to pull an all-nighter. Totally get it. It's not going to totally ruin your world. If you're doing that 3-4 times a week, expect bad things to happen.
Welcome back to the Charlène Gisele show. Today, we are going to talk about how you can improve your sleep and specifically what actions you can take to improve your sleep effectively and what are the benefits of improving your sleep. And I know how hard it is when you have a busy life and work schedule. So today, I'm really excited to bring a very special guest to the show, Dr. Erik Korem, a true innovator in sports science and high performance coaching. Dr. Erik Korem has helped pioneer the use of athletes' wearable and sports science during his 16 years working in the NFL, college football, and with Olympic champions. In this episode, we dive into Erik's expertise and experience in sleep optimization, stress and resilience, and the importance of recovery, key areas that can make or break your ability to perform at your best without burning out. If you're struggling with managing stress, maintaining energy, or pushing yourself without hitting a wall, this conversation is for you. Erik shares actionable advice on how to achieve greatness at work and in life without sacrificing your sleep. Erik, I am so excited to have you on the show. I've been listening to your podcast for quite a while now, so it feels like a super special moment for me to have you as a guest. It's that feeling, when you've been listening to someone and then you meet the person. It's so nice.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. You're accomplished yourself in the field. And it is interesting when you do have somebody on your show that you've been listening to for a long time, because it kind of feels like you know them, and hopefully if the person's been authentic, you probably know a lot about them.
Exactly. That's a lovely feeling. And I can't wait to get our audience familiar with your work. I'm completely amazed by the way you have changed and transformed the athletic field. And I would love for you to perhaps explain to our audience what compelled you to explore the field of peak performance and how that interacts with well-being.
I've never been asked that question before. That's a great question. My career, I was a former college athlete, and I wanted to get into the field of human performance. Now, this is almost 20 years. This is more than 20 years ago now. And I started as what's called a traditional strength and conditioning coach. So I was working on the more physical preparation side of things. And I had a wonderful opportunity in 2004. I was introduced to several athletes that had just competed in the Athens Games. And they were sprinters from the Jamaican and American system. And I had the opportunity to start training them, and then traveling the world as part of their support team. And I started to see how other countries were developing athletes, specifically Australia, where they had developed these institutes of sport. Because here in the United States, we just had the Olympics. It's no surprise, US, finished with the most medals. There's a reason for that. Part of it is the size of the country, and part of it is the genetic pool. You have all these different people coming together, and so you have different athletes with different body types. Well, in countries like Australia, big land mass, very small population relative to land mass. And so for many years, they struggled in the Olympics. And then around 1980, or 88, they developed the Australian Institute of Sport, where they brought together exercise physiologists, biomechanists, psychologists, everybody together under one roof. And in a very short period of time, by the time they got to the Sydney Games in 2000, they were finished in the top 3 in the world. That's pretty remarkable. At one point, they were 50th in medal count to top 3. And so I'm looking at this holistic system that was developed. I'm like, we have nothing like this in the United States because we have a problem. We have too many good athletes, right? So if one gets hurt, you just put in the next one. And so I was on a mission to try to bring what's called high performance sport to the United States. And I had my opportunity in 2011, and I brought athlete tracking technologies to the US. And I was at a university called Florida State, which had a historically great football program. We were the first ones to ever start tracking athletes using unique telemetry devices in practice and in games. And we were able to use that information to improve performance, reduce injuries. Our team had an 88% reduction in injury in 1 year. We won a championship, and then the rest is kind of history. It blew up, opened a multi-billion-dollar market for sports wearables here in the United States. And then I moved on to my career was in sports science and high performance. And so, it was really this chasing this more holistic model, which really helped push things forward during my career in sports. And then as I started looking at just the everyday person like myself, a lot of that doesn't exist when you look at your health and wellness. People over-index on one side of things, and then there's typically a gap that'll cost them down the line. And so my goal was, how do we take this high-performance model, leverage technology, and bring it to anybody in the world so we can democratize ultra-personalized wellness like we were bringing to elite athletes? And so that's where my career kind of took off in another direction.
And what are some of the lessons that you've learned from athleticism or working in the field of sport that can be translated into the business world and a corporate environment?
I would say that there's a physical, a psychological, a technical, a tactical, and intellectual component to elite performance, whether you're an athlete or you're working in the corporate world. What I mean by that, physically, an athlete has to be able to express power, speed, and strength. But let's say I'm working as a lawyer, right? You have to be able to physically sustain and work under very arduous circumstances, long hours. There's a psychological component where you have to be able to regulate yourself. You have to be able to control your attention, your emotions, take action for goal-directed behavior. There's a technical and a tactical part of this too. The technical part is the skill set that you learn during law school. And then the tactical part is really like, how does this all come together to win the case? Yeah. And then there's an intellectual component of this, which is really like life skills, managing yourself. And so that's kind of the lens that I look at things through. It's a high performance model for sport that also carries over into any job that you undertake. And most people, if they were to write this down on a piece of paper, they would go, yep, really good at the technical and the tactical part. I don't really have anything in place for managing myself. I really don't have a whole lot of tools in the toolkit for the psychological component. And the physical part, yeah, I work out a couple times a week and maybe that's it. But there's more subsets to that, right? There's the physical exercise, there's nutrition, there's sleep. And then there's then there's the psychological component and the intellectual component. So I find that most people over-index in a couple areas and they don't, everybody's gonna have a strong suit, but they don't have enough habits and behavior stacked in the other areas. And eventually it's going to rear its head in potentially burnout or poor performance down the line.
And I know you've done so much comprehensive research on sleep. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about the connection in your experience between sleep or lack of sleep or poor sleep or neglect of sleep and burnout prone behaviors?
For sure. One thing I want to bring up before, I was just kind of pausing for a second and thinking, the other big bucket idea is that stress really isn't the enemy. It's the gateway to growth. And I'm going to explain how that connects to sleep. So if we think about, you asked this question before about how the sports, how does that tie into corporate world? The only way that you get better at a skill is by stressing the human body. So for instance, if I want to get stronger, I need to lift something that's a little bit heavy. Why? Because that stimulates my body to adapt to that stimulus and get stronger over time. If I want to improve any task, if I want to learn a skill, I have to deliberately engage in the task of learning, which is frustrating. When you start learning a new skill, that leads to a cascade of events where that create neuroplasticity, which is finalized in sleep. But here's the idea. You need stress and you need rest if you want to grow, adapt, and thrive. Most of us are really good on the stress side of the continuum. And when I say stress, like I'm not talking about stress as in I'm getting worked up over something that I don't need to get worked up over. I'm talking about I'm learning new skills. I'm training my body. I'm undertaking tasks that can create a positive adaptation. The other part of that is sleep. There was a British dramatist named Thomas Dekker, and he said, sleep is the golden chain that ties our health and human bodies together. This was in the 1700s. 100% correct. For instance, let's take learning. When you are awake, like I mentioned, like you take on a difficult task, you start feeling this agitated state. These chemicals get dumped into your bloodstream called catecholamines. It kind of helps harness your focus. While you're learning new skills, certain neurons in your brain that were used during that process kind of get marked for later when you're asleep. Learning and neuroplasticity takes place. And those neuronal connections are either strengthened or selectively weakened during sleep. If you get enough sleep, you're going to strengthen those connections, and the finalization of learning occurs during sleep. If you train the human body and you exercise, when you sleep at night, hormones are released like growth hormone during slow wave or deep sleep, which helps repair your tissues. Testosterone is primarily released in the latter part of sleep during longer REM phases of sleep. As a matter of fact, with older males, you can actually predict their serum testosterone level by looking at their sleep and if it's fractured or not. And so there's a lot of people using hormone replacement therapies now. That's a personal decision. But after about the age of 30, most males start to decline in their testosterone anywhere between 0.5% to 1% a year, but you can slow that down considerably. There was a paper that was done. They showed that if you sleep restrict yourself to 5 hours a night over a week, you age yourself in the terms of testosterone over a decade. And so, like from a hormonal perspective, getting enough sleep, enough good quality sleep is absolutely critical. When it comes to regulating our mood and making mood appropriate decisions, having better cognitive function, all of those processes are impacted by how much we sleep. And so there are really three things that we should focus on when it comes to our sleep. And I would say most people out there I'd say in America, it's at least 60% of Americans use a wearable device now. And so we get all this complex information like when I went to bed, when I woke up, REM sleep, deep sleep. I'll just let you off the hook. There's only three things that you actually should focus on when it comes to your sleep. Number one is how much sleep I get. 7 to 9 hours is the golden window. There is an inverted U-shaped relationship between your duration of your sleep and things like type 2 diabetes and risk of cardiovascular disease, meaning if you get less than 7 or more than 9, Unless you're an elite athlete, sleeping more than 9 hours a night, for some reason, it's like too much of a good thing's bad, right? Like bread is great. It fuels the body, or grains are excellent. But if I eat way too much, I'm going to gain weight, right? So it's like too much of a good thing can be bad. The second thing is, so there's duration. I'll tell you what's really interesting. If you want to understand the impact of a behavior on your health, look at twin studies. Because genetically similar twins, if you modify the behavior of one, you can see the health impact. And there was a study with twins with over 21,000 twin pairs, and they looked at duration of sleep. And it was over a 10-year period of time. And the twin that got less than 7 hours of sleep, I think their all-cause mortality increased around 24%. And so it's pretty significant, like the impact that sleep can have on your longevity. The next thing is onset. So you have duration, 7 hours. Onset, when you go to bed, it's really critical. There is a big difference between going to bed at 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. There was a paper done by the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard and the University of Colorado, and it used over 300,000 people in the UK Biobank. And they found that if you shifted your sleep onset back 1 hour, so let's say you were going to bed at 1 and you went to bed at 12 at midnight, there was a 21% reduction in major depression. If you shifted it back 2 hours, there was almost a 40% reduction. And I'll get to why here in a minute. And then the third one is consistency. And this one messes people up more than probably anything else, is that probably Sunday night through Thursday, you have one sleep routine. And Friday and Saturday night, it's the weekend. You end up going to bed later, sleeping in longer. If you're not very consistent with your sleep schedule, you can get something called social jet lag, which can lead to, just think about all the negative impacts of getting jet lag: poor mood, you're sleepy and tired. It can actually lead to weight gain, increased risk of depression. And so if you ever notice you have a hard time getting started on Monday, it's probably because you weren't consistent throughout the week. And so the three things that can dramatically impact your ability to adapt to stress and thrive in relationship to sleep, the three behaviors are duration, 7 to 9, onset, and consistency. And I'll go back to one more point about that onset component. When the researchers were looking at, okay, why is it that people that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier have less risk of depression? And it goes back to something very foundational, that your sleep-wake cycle is regulated by a couple things. One is this kind of what we call homeostatic drive, which means like I wake up in the morning and I should feel refreshed. As the day goes on, there's this biochemical buildup of different substrates, and I should be tired in the evening. That's just kind of this natural increase in sleepiness throughout the day. The other part is you have a circadian clock, or this internal clock. And this internal clock is synchronized through something called Zeitgebers, or time givers, one of which is light, natural light. And those the authors of the study looked, and they're like, the only thing that they could possibly surmise is that people that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier get more natural exposure to sunlight. Because sunlight anchors your circadian clock, it leads to a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that improve your mood, metabolism, and overall health. And so one of the superpowers for somebody that really wants to thrive under stress, get adequate sleep and enough sunlight. Even if it's just little breaks in the day where you just go outside and get a little sunlight, it makes a tremendous impact on your ability to fall asleep at night, stay asleep, and wake up and feel good.
I'm sure this is something you hear, if not every day, multiple times a week, is the pushback, right? So intellectually, everything that you said makes complete sense. I'm bought in. It sounds great. I get it. Cognitively, I'm like on board. But, and that's the big but and the objection that I hear, I have no time. Or yes, but I have a deadline. Yes, but my boss sent me an email at 1 a.m. Yes, but I have to prepare for my meeting tomorrow morning and I have to pull an all-nighter. Yes, but everyone else in the office is doing an all-nighter. And there is something culturally in the corporate world that is still toxic around this idea that somehow being the one that sleeps the least is the most heroic person in the office, right? At least in certain industries, it's still perceived as a badge of honor. I see that shifting a bit, but I think there is still a lot of work. What would you say could be most helpful to change our mindset and our viewpoint around making those behavioral changes?
Yeah, I would say there's two things. One, it takes what it takes. I can't take credit for that line. My friend Trevor Moad, who he wrote the book, It Takes What It Takes. It was relationship to sports. If you want to be elite, there's certain things you just have to do. And if you're the person that's like, I do great on 5 hours of sleep, I can almost guarantee you don't have the genetic polymorphism that it's going to allow you to thrive on 5 hours of sleep. It's like a fraction of 1%. Most of your life, okay, you have children, a new child enters the world. I totally get it. It's not going to be perfect. I have 3 of them, right? There are going to be seasons in life. Maybe you're an auditor, or maybe you're working, taxes or whatever, like you're an accountant. Like there's certain like tax season, okay? But most of your life should not be chaos. If it is, then you need to reevaluate things because you may not live a very long life. So unless you're a soldier or you're being deployed into a war zone, like you're working in corporate, the corporate world, like it doesn't have to be like that. So if more than X percent, I would say if more than like 10% of your days are like, I've got to pull an all-nighter, unless you're working in a medical profession where you have to work all night at a hospital, like I would reevaluate the situation. I now own my own company. It's a technology startup. I totally get it. You can work yourself to death, quite literally. So, one bad night of sleep, no big deal. You got a deadline that comes and you got to pull an all-nighter. Totally get it. It's not going to totally ruin your world. If you're doing that 3-4 times a week, expect bad things to happen. It's like if I told you, Erik, I can't eat healthy food and all I can do is drink alcohol. Okay, expect for your liver to fail on you and expect problems. You're going to gain weight. I don't have time to exercise. Great. Your life is going to get cut short. So the reality is like you either get it done or you don't. And so you need to, do I want to be elite at what I'm doing? Do I want to be healthy and do I want to thrive? If you are in a toxic work environment that does not allow for these things, maybe that's time to reevaluate that. And I know that's hard. Look, I worked in professional football. I worked in elite college football where there's a lot of money on the line for the people at the top. You're getting judged quite literally every Saturday and Sunday in front of millions of people on national television. I totally get it. The pressure was intense. And when we won at some of these places, it was more relief than joy. Okay? It doesn't have to be that way all the time. And so I would just say, look, reprioritize your life. Relationships with other people are really important. Exercise, eating good about 80% of the time, and then making sure, you turn off the Netflix or whatever it is at night so that you can get some sleep. And then when it comes to you got 2 or 3 days where it's going to be really, really difficult, great. You're prepared for it, right? You're robust and you can stand up under that pressure. But if this is an all the time thing, expect bad outcomes.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And I think that ties into the concept of periodization in sports, right? It's all about, isn't it?
I have never heard somebody, that's a very interesting concept. We actually, go ahead, finish your statement. I want to add some nuance to that. It's really cool that you brought this up.
Oh, well, it's probably due to the fact that I'm in the middle of my tapering period and preparing for a race. So, periodization is at the forefront of my mind because I'm working with a coach. So I have to say that although I come from a very corporate background and I'm an ex-attorney, going into sports has helped me reevaluate my relationship with sleep and my body and overall wellness. I want to be completely transparent with you. I was diagnosed with chronic insomnia, and it's really through that journey that I developed an appreciation for sleep, because I struggled so much for many years and I neglected it and sacrificed it up until the breaking point that was one of the contributing factors to my burnout. And if I'm being really candid, I waited for shit to hit the fan until I decided to make a transition. But sports has really helped me because I could see the impact on my performance and I could feel the impact on my performance. And then working through periodization with my coaches has completely broadened my horizon. So I would love for you to perhaps give your
First
insights.
of all, what event are you training for?
A marathon.
Okay, that's awesome. I would never run a marathon. I'm so I have a ton of respect for you. I hate running. I love cycling, but it's like one of the I played football, so sprinting was cool, but long distance running, God bless you. That is awesome that you can do that and enjoy it. And what a great accomplishment it's going to be when you cross that finish line. You should be very proud of yourself for the work that you're putting in. But what you're talking about, periodization, is basically just a plan or design where strategically over time, you're increasing the volume of training, which in your case could be mileage. If you're in the weight room, it could be reps and sets, right? And then intensity. If you're lifting weights, it's how much load is on the bar, or if you're running, it's the, percentage of your maximum heart rate or VO2 max if you're getting really, really technical. And then there's also the density, or how frequently you train. So Tudor Bompa is the one that actually is given a lot of credit for the term periodization, but it's just a structured plan. And most people don't have a structured plan over time, over 12, 16, in Olympic sport, we'd have a quadrennial cycle. We'd be working every 4 years and then break it down into annual cycles and then break it down into even subcycles. But here's the kicker. Just having a periodized plan is putting you on the right track. Okay. Research that we did at the University of Kentucky when I was there, and is really part of the foundational technology that sits underneath my platform called AIM-7. We found that more of a fluid approach, meaning a daily adjustment based off of how you're adapting to stress, you get outsized results. Meaning first of all, you start with a structured plan. And then every day, if you can measure certain things, like if you have a wearable and you can measure your heart rate variability, or you can do a subjective measures of just a quick questionnaire on how I'm feeling, that every day you don't wake up feeling the same. Why? Because there are certain things that are, I'm showing you a cup of coffee here, right? Here's a cup of coffee. And let's say that this big cup of coffee is filled with coffee, and that represents how much stress my body can handle. It's my total gas tank for stress. You may be dumping in more stress on a daily basis than you can handle, because maybe there's a financial stress that comes in. Maybe there's a relational stress. All of those things are pulling from the same adaptive reserves that are going to be used to adapt to the marathon. Does that make sense? So stress is a very generic system. And when the stress systems are activated, they're going to mobilize proteins to address the dominant threat or need. And so what we found is if your body's doing great today, it's just right about average, then you just stick with the plan. If it's better than average, let's say your heart rate variability is better, your mood's better, you have a lot of energy subjectively, guess what? That's a day to push it maybe 10 to 20% higher. Let's say you wake up and you just feel like crap. Dial down the intensity. Maybe you keep the volume the same, or you lower the volume and keep the intensity the same. We found that over an 8-week period of time, people that used a fluid model versus a static model, meaning they had a plan and they just followed it, had anywhere between 100 to 500% more improvement than the people doing the same workout right next to them. Because everybody's adapting differently based off of all these complex factors. We actually bake that into our system at AIM-7 That's the company that I own, and we've actually made this available. And if you use a fluid model, then you can start going, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to push myself a little harder there. I'm going to dial things back. And one more quick nuanced thought. I know people listening may have an Aura ring or some of these different devices to give them a readiness score, right? Don't let that readiness score dictate how you're going to perform today. Meaning if it says you're a 75, some days you're like, you know what? I feel great. Wearable data alone is a lagging indicator of how you're adapting to stress. Mm-hmm. How you feel is more of a leading indicator. And so if it says you're a 75 or a 60 or whatever, and you feel great, like screw that, go work hard. There may be some things you may want to pay attention to. For instance, if your temperature bumps up a degree or two, now that could be a red alarm, but just know these are imperfect machines. And what you're trying to develop is something called interoception, where you really understand your internal environment and you can start to dial things up and down yourself. So I know we kind of went off a little bit, but periodization, having a plan. If everybody had a plan for, I'm going to exercise 4 times a week, and I'm going to do resistance training twice, and I'm going to do some, aerobic training for 2 hours a week. And everybody had a plan for basically how they were going to eat and basically how they were going to sleep. You just kind of some simple heuristics. That would solve probably 80% of the diseases that we're seeing today and prevent most burnout. It's when you say fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we could dive a little bit more into mindset, and particularly mindset around sleep. I'm really curious to get your opinion on how you've been able to help pro athletes, NFL players, Olympian with that pre-performance anxiety. Because in many ways, you've helped firsthand athletes with, well, it's game day tomorrow, or it's the Olympics tomorrow. And that's a huge amount of anxiety. If we translate that into the corporate world, it could be, well, I'm in court tomorrow, I'm pleading, I have a board meeting, and I have an investors meeting. And a lot of our listeners say that the night before that peak performance, they're feeling super anxious. So they're going to do exactly what they know they shouldn't be doing. For example, drinking heavily, soothing themselves, watching series, night procrastination, right? The blueprint of what not to do, because they're trying to escape from that which they are anxious about. I'm really curious how you've handled that with your athletes, and whether you could give us some insights that we could translate into the business world.
Yeah, so I call this mental fitness. And so I define mental fitness as the ability to be consciously present and to process information without bias, which empowers you to respond quickly and rationally to changing circumstances through committed actions anchored in your values and in your training. So let me break that down. There's a myth that elite athletes or, XYZ CEO or XYZ litigator that's you put on a pedestal. They don't experience uncomfortable thoughts, emotions, and feelings. That is totally untrue. As a matter of fact, did you see that person, the pistol shooter in the Olympics, where he put his hand in his pocket? It was like memes all over the internet about this guy. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I actually, sorry, I haven't seen that meme.
This guy, I don't know what country he was from, but everybody else, these pistol shooters have like these crazy glasses and all these devices. And he literally just put his hand in his pocket and just kind of looked and shot. And it was an international sensation. He looked like he had zero emotion. And they interviewed him and he was like, no, I was actually scared out of my mind. Here's the thing. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that has to impact how you perform. So, there was an Olympic cyclist named Sir Chris Hoy. He's the greatest Olympic cyclist of all time. He won 6 Olympic gold medals. When it was asked what it felt like to race in an Olympic finals, he said it felt like he was going to the gallows. Like he literally felt like he was going to be executed. But then he would say, then I would shift my attention to my hands on the steering wheel. or my feet in the clips, or my butt in the seat. Essentially what he's doing is he was harnessing and taking control of his attention. My friend, Dr. Peter Haberl, he says that attention is the currency of performance. Every great athlete, every great performer, every great competitor wants control of their attention. Because if you know where your attention is, then you can shift it and you can take action anchored in your values and in your training. So one of the best ways to develop attentional control is mindfulness. Mindfulness is not some woohoo, like crazy practice. You're not like, it's not a spiritual experience. It can be, but the basic practice of mindfulness is not. What you're doing is you're training attentional control. And you can do this through several different mechanisms. You can focus on your breath. Basically, what you're doing is you're focusing on some type of physical sensation typically. And at some point in time, let's say you're focusing on your breath, your eyes are closed, and you're observing your breath going in and out. Your brain's going to kind of wander off. It's in the moments where you realize that you wandered off and you bring your attention back to your breath that the plastic changes occur in your brain. Research demonstrates that mindfulness reduces mind wandering. It prevents rumination. Rumination is like, you're just kind of chewing on a thought over and over and over again. It can decrease anxiety, depression, even perception of pain. And Amisha Jha's lab at the University of Miami shows that just 60 minutes a week, doing it, I think it's 10 to 12 weeks, literally changes the structure of your brain. So one of the most powerful tools that you can use is mindfulness. Why? Because you can control your attention. Once you have control of your attention, the world is at your disposal. You can, if you're over aroused, you can use breathwork tools to calm yourself down. You can use positive affirmations. But when you're stuck in this vicious cycle of worry and you're not even really conscious of it, it's very hard to break out. And when right before you go and you have to do the hard thing, if you can control your attention, and look, if the outcome of a situation is important and uncertain, and you will be judged on that outcome, you should expect to feel uncomfortable. So in advance, know that if this is important, if it's uncertain, and the outcome, I'm going to be judged on, like maybe it's a first date, right? You get nervous or whatever, you're going into court. Expect to be uncomfortable, but then you can still take actions like you've been training your whole life for this. If you put in the work, if the preparation has been done, then you should be able to take confident action and perform. If you have not prepared adequately, that's a problem. But when I have worked with athletes in the past, it's like, hey, we have been training for X amount of time. You have put in the work, correct? We have now developed the tools so that you can control your attention. In the crucible moment, be aware of where your thoughts are and then take action. And so that's what I would say is like probably the most critical missing link I don't see being talked about enough in these other areas.
I'm so glad you've brought that up. It's one of the most important tools, and I think you can retrain your mind. And instead of seeking escape behavior, you can actually just control your attention and what you decide to focus on. I love hypnotherapy. I think that sleep hypnosis is a beautiful tool to control that wandering mind and to actually train it a bit like a pet. That's the way I think about my mind. At least my untrained pet is now being trained. That's how I like to think about it. I had a very wild pet before and I couldn't fall asleep before, but now I can.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
And in terms of technology, which I know is your field of expertise, is there one more tool or habit or behavior that you would like to highlight for our listener to train their mind and their sleep hygiene?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like in regards to technology, that we live in a world where wearable data is available at your fingertips. it may not be useful all the time. It could be something that like, hey, like for instance, an Aura ring. I love Aura. I think it's a great company. I know their CEO, Tom Hale. It's one of those tools where here's the Aura ring right here. Like, I wonder if I've got good sleep hygiene, meaning I'm going to bed and waking up and all these different things. It's a tool maybe you would buy and use for a period of time. And then maybe once you feel like you've kind of mastered that, maybe you don't need it anymore. So you got to have the right tool for the right situation. If you're training for a marathon, like a Garmin device or an Apple Watch may be very helpful, or a Polar heart strap to make sure you're staying in the right heart rate zone. When it comes to technology for mental performance, Peter, I mentioned him before. He was the senior psychologist for the U.S. Olympics. When I visited the training facility in Colorado Springs, I was like, Peter, I want to see where you train these athletes. And there was labs down the, biomechanics labs, like down the hallway. There was physiotherapist rooms. They had the weight room with all sorts of unique devices for measuring bar speed and different things like that. We go into his room and it's just an empty room with a mirror on a wall, and that's it. And some of the best athletes in the world are getting trained in an empty room. Why? Because most of the tools you need to train your mind, you really don't need, technology, unless you're like, you really need some biofeedback. And there are some really cool biofeedback tools for some people. Like, I just can't get things in rhythm. There's biofeedback tools where you can see your respiration and heart rate, and you can start breathing around different heartbeats. But for most people, you could take your phone, turn on a timer for 10 minutes, turn it over, set it down, close your eyes, and just focus on your breath for 10 minutes. That's about as technologically advanced as you would need to get. If you want to improve, like if you want to practice breathwork tools to calm yourself down, there are really cool tools. Like we developed one for AIM-7 where like you just hold it in your hand and it's like a 4-second inhale, 8-second exhale, and it's kind of beating in your hand. Like those type of tools are really good. If you want to increase your arousal, you can do like certain types of like vigorous inhales or like rapid staccato breathing. But I don't think there's a whole lot of technology that's needed unless it's for a very specific reason, like biofeedback for somebody that's doing a very specific task. Most of it is just fundamentally coming down to, do I know where my attention is? And once I know where it's at, if I'm over aroused, can I use a breathwork tool to kind of bring myself back down to normal? If I'm under aroused, can I, elevate my my state of arousal? And then can I then shift my attention to a positive action I can take that's anchored in my values and anchored in my training? If people did that 90% of the time, they would see a dramatic change in the conversation that's happening between their ears.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think there is a very toxic trait that is quite common, and it's around, well, let me throw money at the problem. Let me buy all the toys and gadgets in the world. And now that I have, all these devices, surely my sleep is going to get fixed. But it takes intention and action and behavioral changes, right?
Yes.
So what I see very often happen is, well, you get your data, but you don't do anything about it. Magic is not going to happen. So I think it's really important. That brings us full circle around that mindset piece and making sure you follow up on the behavior.
I think a coach may be the best. Like, for instance, you hired a coach to help you with your running, right?
Yeah.
You could put on a Garmin device on your wrist and just go run. And it's like, great, I got data. Sometimes you need a coach, and that's where like a program, maybe there's a specific app program designed for the specific thing, or it's worth investing a couple $1,000s in a coach that's very good for a short period of time for several months to get you back on track. I think that's when you have to, technology is one thing, it's data. It's using the data in an actionable way and then focusing on what's the one high leverage action I can take. That I think is where the benefit is.
What is the one action you took that's changed your well-being for the most positive?
My faith is really important to me. And I think constantly being reminded that there's something bigger than me, that I'm not the center of the universe, that I'm loved. So I spend a good amount of time praying. I know that I'm flawed. I'm a father of 3 and a husband for 15 years. And like, I need strength to be, everybody's one stupid decision away from ruining their life. Let's just be honest, right? You see it all the time. XYZ person, all of a sudden in the media, they do something dumb. You're like, oh my gosh, right? And there's redemption and forgiveness and all this kind of stuff. But, I lead a team at work. I lead a family at home. And for me, my faith, just constantly investing in that is probably the most important thing in my life. The other actions, I take are all like subsidiary to that.
Thank you. That's a very healthy reminder. I really appreciate this conversation, and I'm so grateful for your insights. And it's nearly bedtime for me, so I'm going to go ahead and implement all of that to continue optimize my sleep.
Awesome.
On that note, Erik, thanks again, and look forward to speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Now that you heard about the power of sleep and maintaining sleep hygiene from Erik, I would like to invite you to take your sleep into your own hands and use mindfulness tools. One of my favorite ways to fall asleep at night is sleep hypnosis. So if you haven't already downloaded or listened to our podcast episode, I will add them in the show notes to make sure that you can start optimize your sleep tonight and fall asleep with my sleep meditation or sleep hypnosis recording. Have a good night and sleep well.